Sam has labored as hard and as long in these unrewarding vineyards for as long as anyone I know. Even beginning as a student in the 1960s, Sam was working for our people. He then became a lawyer, and he defended some people in our cause to the point where some watchdogs on the other side said that he's the equivalent of a terrorist. He has worked for many organizations and spoken on many opportunities, all in the interests of our people. And one thing I can also say about him, Sam has spoken at every single American Renaissance conference all the way back to 1994. Well, Sam and I were both reared as Presbyterians. And we were reared in households in which to do something like this on Sunday morning is Sabbath breaking. We should be in church, you see. And when I mentioned this to Sam, he said, no, don't worry. The Sabbath may be broken in times for the requirements of necessity and charity. And so, in this time of great necessity, please welcome Sam Dickson. Hang around.
What a joy and honor it is to be here today and to address this gathering that has taken place despite terrorism, or equivalent of terrorism, by people who really do want to violate the freedom of others. And to see this organization building its ranks up steadily from one conference to another. I think our attendance is up about 50% from the last one, and it has been a splendid conference. It would be wrong about me not to reciprocate Jared's kind words. Jared once explained to me that he has been watching the Olympics and that he found it very distasteful that the victors would jump around and wave their arms in the air and so forth. And I listened to this and I told Jared, no, I think that it is appropriate to show some sign of acceptance, a recognition of one's own virtue and worth. I have long since passed beyond the teachings of childhood and the Presbyterian Church that virtue is its own reward and this sort of thing. I agree with the old English proverb that brass will drive out gold. And if you don't speak up for yourself, nobody will speak up for you. So I have to speak up for Jared because he wants to be very modest and just walk off the stage after winning the Olympic medal. But Jared is too aristocratic for his own good. And we do not live in a world run by aristocrats anymore, as we well know. We live in a world run by the rabble and by plutocrats who have nothing to do with aristocracy. Americans tend to confuse a plutocrat with an aristocrat. But I have a little gift for Jared, which I'll give him in a second. But I think Martin in his introduction touched on some of these things, but I think often of Jared in terms of several lines from Kipling. His poem "If" is one of them. That if you can bear to hear the words the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. We've all experienced that with Hy-Vee Byrish and the SPLC and the whole professional industry of twisting our words to make a trap for fools. And the other, if you can see all you've worked for destroyed and build it up with worn-out tools, then you'll be a man. And these really apply to Jared. And the final Kipling quote that I think applies to Jared and everyone here, which is an anti-individualism poem, which I'm in my old age have come to be very skeptical of individualism, is what Kipling said, that the strength of the wolf is in the pack, and the strength of the pack is in the wolf. And we have an alpha wolf in Jared Taylor, and we do. The Greeks, I love the Greeks. I've been in love with the Greeks forever, since I was a child. And they have a saying, which is quickly slipping out of my mind, but there it is again. The proverb in the ancient Greeks had was that an army of sheep led by a lion is more to be feared than an army of lions led by sheep. So I have a little gift here for Jared. Yesterday was Confederate Memorial Day, a day in which we remember our ancestors. Jared and I are both descended from people who did rather distinguished service to the Confederate cause. And I found this on my way up here. It's a little jigger with the rebel shot glass, and it's got the Confederate soldier with the flag holding the little chicken. So
Well, thank you very
it's
much.
it's a small token. There are many reasons why we should regard this struggle with joy and not with sorrow. There is a tendency to sit around and feel sorry for ourselves and exchange stories of how we've suffered and how bad things are. I call this the game of ain't it awful. But there are great benefits to be had in living your life for your people, as Jared has, and to a lesser extent, I feel that I have also. To have somebody like Jared as a friend is a great blessing, and I have met a number of people in this cause whose friendship has more than compensated for any sufferings that I have endured. We hear about how bad off we are. We hear about the immigration statistics. We hear about all of the things many of the things that Jared touched on. But I want to say a little bit before I really turn to the topic of my talk about how much better off we are. As Jared said, I came to these truths early in life in high school. And back then, there was no organization like American Renaissance. There was nothing like the National Policy Institute. There was no bibliography of scientific works by people like Dr. Whitman and others, Dr. Lynn. The best we had was Carlton Putnam's Race and Reason and Race and Reality. Carlton Putnam was a great man and a personal hero of mine, but he was hobbled by the fact that he did not have a degree in things like genetics and anthropology. But we had no bibliography. We had no organizations. And people, it was just as left-wing, to use that worn-out phrase, back when I was a child as it is now. I was talking to some of the young folks last night at the party that we had, and they were talking about how it must have been better in my day, and were recounting stories of political correctness in the schools. And I told them it was not different at all. People believed passionately in equality then. The history books were just as lying as they are now. The media was even more dishonest then than it is now. We have come a long way. It is hard for young people to see how far we have come. To have a meeting like this is a huge step forward. There was nothing like it in my life for years and years and years. And I remember I hosted a little conference at the High Hampton in Cashiers, North Carolina, in time where we heard papers on breaking out of the ghetto because we were completely marginalized and unable to be heard. The only person who gave a talk there that actually fulfilled that promise of the talk was our leader, Mr. Taylor. And I'm honored, bliss it was to be alive in that first dawn. But we are much better off, and we will be much better off 10 years from now because a lie cannot withstand the truth. It may have greater resources, it may prevail for a while. You can try to kill everybody that expresses the truth. You can try to ruin them financially and professionally, as the Southern Poverty Law Center has sought to do with some success with me. You can do all these things. But the truth remains the truth. I am very much opposed to the modern idea of sort of well-meaning and woolly-minded liberalism that everybody has his own truth. I don't know if you've heard this. I hear it all the time where I live. No, we have our own interpretations of the truth, but to my mind, I agree with Plato. The truth exists independently of what you think. You can think that you're meeting at the North Pole today, but you're not meeting at the North Pole today. You're meeting in Nashville, Tennessee today. It doesn't matter that your truth is that you're at the North Pole. There's a famous verse from Paul's epistle to the Galatians that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the converse of that is true. That you shall know the untruth, and it shall make you slave. That if you believe a lie, you are enslaved by the lie. And our enemies intend to enslave us by lies, and they have worked very hard constantly to promote their lies. We have a problem in that we are in the grips of an ideology. There is an ideology that rules America and rules France and Germany and the other white countries of the world today. It is like the ideology that ruled, is alike in many respects, but it is similar to the ideology that ruled and pervaded Russia in the 1930s under Joseph Stalin, in that it is all-pervasive, and the ideology is intolerant of dissent. They're not yet to the point that they can simply send you to the gulag or put you in the cellar in Ekaterinburg and kill you and your family. I think many of them would actually like this. I suspect the people outside demonstrating would like that kind of society. There are probably many in their ranks that like the idea of putting people in the cellar and shooting them down. But the truth remains the truth, and eventually the truth will prevail over falsehood. This country, I'm going to say some things. I have only one post. I'm going to say some things that are going to seem blasphemous toward our country. I'm sorry, but they have to be said. Other than one set of German ancestors, I have no ancestors who were not already here in America before the War for Independence. And so I count myself as a humble little bit of the founding stock of America. And I think throughout the American history, people in my family have felt a sort of proprietary interest in America. They felt they were warp and woof of America. They were part of its fabric. And they would be very upset, I'm sure, if they heard what I'm about to say. But it is the truth, and it has to be said. And it sounds like I am plagiarizing Rams Paul last night, but he just channeled the same sources in some occult way. But there is a saying that the child is father to the man, that you can see the man in the child. And in America, the America today, the child was father to the man. And America began with what has to be admitted to be was a lie. We began our independence. The first act of the unfortunate separation from Britain was the Declaration of Independence. And the very first sentence of that began our country founded upon a lie. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, that is manic speech. That's a kind of insanity that the Greeks would have put into a play of some character whom the gods hated and had made mad so that they could destroy him. I say, in expressing the truth that I suspect all of us in this room know, that I hold this truth to be self-evident, that not one single man or woman at any time in history has ever been equal, and that all men and women are created unequal, even identical twins. Even a set of identical twins, while they may share the same genetics, are immediately unequal because they're not equal in birth order. One is born and begins his life sometime before the other. It may seem a small thing, but it makes it true that even identical twins are not equal. Now, the president, Obama, gave a second inaugural speech not long ago, which is something that I commend to you for your study, because it parallels what I'm going to say today. Obama quoted the lines from the Declaration of Independence, and he explained America in terms of a pursuit of freedom. Now, he is not alone. He and his ilk are not alone in their explanation of the narrative of American history in terms of the pursuit of freedom. Tea Party adherents would feel exactly the same way. They would quarrel over whether things like Obamacare and certain degrees of government regulation represent that freedom. But they would be prisoners. They would be slaves to the same false narrative of American history. And once you buy into that false narrative, you have lost. You have lost the truth. You are a slave. You are enslaved to the narrative. The narrative has to change. We cannot go back. We should not go back. We should not want to go back to the America of the 1950s. It is time to discard this and to move forward with a different, an alternative narrative. The standard narrative of American history, whether from the left to the right or the center or from Barack Obama or Lindsey Graham or John McCain, is the same thing. It is an insane explanation of American history based upon a lie that was expressed at the founding of the nation. And you are not liberated by not having the truth. You might conceive of the truth as a binding, confining, shackling thing. Wouldn't it be great if you could just choose not to have the law of gravity? Wouldn't it be great if we were just free to ignore the laws of gravity? In the same way, our enemies love to be free to ignore the lessons of genetics and the findings of science on things like racial differences and the inheritance of mental and physical abilities. Truth, in some sense, is shackling. But you have to be shackled to the truth to be free. Freedom does not mean that you can create your own world. To create your own world means you are insane. You're not living in a world of reality. If you think you're Napoleon Bonaparte, you are not free to think that instead of realizing, no, I'm not Napoleon Bonaparte. I'm just an ordinary person, Sam Dickson, who has nothing to do with Napoleon Bonaparte. The standard narrative of American history is the Whig theory of history on myth. The Whig theory of history construed and interpreted English history as being the growth of freedom from precedent to precedent, the expansion of the ballot, the reduction of the power of the crown, and so on. That this was the course of English history, and then we took it over and made it the course of human history. Now, this is a lie. It's a lie factually that English history was a history of precedent broadening down to precedent. It's also a lie in ways that are not merely factual lies. It is a lie in that such a narrative, such an interpretation of humanity and of the history of the different cultures and races and religions is false. It is meaningless. It strips human beings of everything that makes life worth living. Their race, their country, their language, their literature, their heritage, their folk ways. It strips us all down into people that live in a world of ideology and of pursuing philosophical whims, like the idea of freedom. And this false narrative brings about, as lies do, enslaving yourself to things that are destructive, that are self-destructive. And it doesn't take a close student of our current contemporary affairs to see how these lies have led to just fantastic mistakes or crimes, because sometimes they are just crimes. Let's look for a second at some of these. Our Anglo-Saxon forefathers established what should be the foreign policy of the United States, what is good for us. And that foreign policy stood upon two pillars. One was George Washington's beware of foreign entanglements. Stay out of Europe. Mind your own business. We are blessed to be on a separate side of the planet from most of the peoples of the world. We have virtually no natural enemies except nowadays a demographic enemy south of our border. We don't need to be involved in wars between France and Germany, and wars between Russia and Germany, and wars between Israel and the Palestinians. This is none of our affair. But under the manic freedom interpretation of American history, let's see where this has gone. We now have alliances with 130 nations all over the world. We are a bankrupt country pursuing all these alliances. We see ourselves as the arbiters of whether the people of Crimea are to be allowed to vote to rejoin the country with which they were historically tied for well over a century before the fiat of a communist dictator separated Crimea from Ukraine. This is now our business, and we are incensed that Russia, whose people live in Crimea, and where they have their their only naval base, we are incensed that Russia would interfere with what we want to do in Crimea. We pursue all of these willy-nilly things. Obama, in one of his State of the Union addresses, said of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that we would never cease to involve ourselves in these adventures until Muslim women were liberated all over the world. Now, this is insanity. It is the voice of someone insane, like the song about Don Quixote that was so popular in the Kennedy era, to dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe. And this, again, was manic talk. The Greeks would have put that kind of crazy statement into the mouth of somebody who had been driven insane and whom the Furies were getting ready to kill on the behalf of the gods, to fight an unbeatable foe, and to march into hell for a heavenly cause. The fact that the Kennedys and their ilk embraced all this and felt it described them was a rare moment of truth in this country. The reality of history has to be ignored by the ideology. We have to be told that Islam is tolerant, and in fact, it's superior to Christianity. It's better than we are. It's a better form kind of religion than ours, because Islam is tolerant. Now, the most rudimentary knowledge of history tells us that this is untrue. You know, we once had a Christian North Africa and a Christian Middle East before Muhammad came along. Many of these people didn't choose to be Muslims. They were given the choice of die or convert. The ones who hung on, the little minorities now that have hung on in the Middle East, have been subjected to centuries of persecution by the Muslims. We've seen horrific massacres, like what took place when the Muslims took Constantinople and massacred every Greek Christian in Santa Sofia, to the point where the conqueror's horse slipped on the blood when he rode his horse in triumph into our church to change it into a mosque. This is not the history of a tolerant religion. And the history of people living next door to adherents of this religion has not been a happy history. Ask the Armenians, ask the Greeks, ask the Spaniards if they know their real history. Ask the Serbs, ask the Bulgarians, ask the Romanians. There is no Christian people who has ever lived under Muslim rule that regards it anything as a nightmare and a horror. But in our country, we have profound students of world religion and history like George Bush, who announced immediately when the terrorist attack took place on 9/11 that Islam is a religion of peace. No, the lie cannot live in peace with the truth. We need our own narrative. And that narrative should be founded in the flesh and blood of our people. It should be founded in the very basic reality of life, where a sperm meets an egg and a child is born into a family, in which the child learns his mother tongue in a fascist situation in which the tongue is imposed upon him by his father and mother, and he is not allowed to choose whether something is an apple or whether it's called a yabloko. He is forced to call the apple an apple. But we start with the very biological. We start our journeys in life with this biological fact. And we are members of a family. And we're members of a larger and extended family called our race. And especially our race that shares our history and our civilization. Mere DNA is not enough. You can go to Afghanistan and see beautiful people who look like they might be on the streets of Stockholm. There was a famous one that the National Geographic published years ago of a hauntingly beautiful woman with these exotic blue-green eyes who looked like one of us. But she was not one of us, because mere DNA is not enough. You have to, an idea, a race, has to live in its own people. And you have to have other things other than mere DNA. We want to explain the American narrative quite differently from Tea Party and Barack Obama, very differently from John McCain and Lindsey Graham. We want to explain the American narrative as a story of a real people, a related people, a people with a real and peculiar culture, with a real and peculiar civilization all its own, with its own separate and peculiar heritage and history. That is our explanation of human history. It is the struggle of peoples with peoples. It is the story that leads us from the history of our ancestors who left the Caucasus and spread across Europe, created our related family of languages that stretch from Gallic through Latin and Greek to the Teutonic languages of our own, the people who were part of the history of antiquity, of the pagan history, of the Parthenon. We want to explain it in terms of the writings of the ancient Greeks and Latins who affected forever the growth of our race's civilization and history. We want to explain it in terms of the coming of Christianity and the building of the great Gothic cathedrals, in our own heroes. This is our explanation of history, our narrative of the history not merely of America, but the history of our homeland in Europe. This was another sad thing about the American history, is that we departed from Mother England like a skinhead getting tattooed and going out to get drunk and raise hell, instead of a son or daughter being sent happily to marry his or her spouse and to start a new family. And I think of this every July the 4th when I start hearing about how awful the British are, and British tyranny, and this kind of nonsense. Britain was the freest country on earth in 1776. We were ourselves Britons, and we were initially fighting for the rights of Englishmen. They were not philosophical whimsies like Jefferson's Declaration. You knew what those rights were. Habeas corpus, a man's home is his castle. The king can't just willy-nilly invade people's houses and inventory what they have and check what they're reading and monitor their emails. That was a very different world before the world of Obama, where we're in the pursuit of these whimsical, nonsensical freedoms all over the world. Everything we write and say is being monitored by the government. No, the rights of Englishmen were concrete and definite. They were based in history. They meant something. Our narrative lies in that. We are concrete. We base ourselves upon the granite truths of family, of race, of religion, of language, of culture. There are problems with that. There are problems in that our family is somewhat dysfunctional. We have a lot of members of our family who hate each other, and a lot of them have reason to hate each other. The Irish hate the English and Scots, and the English and Scots hate the Irish. The Irish Catholics hate the Presbyterians, and the Presbyterians hate the Irish Catholics. The French sometimes hate the Germans hate the French, the Russians hate the Germans hate the Russians. Yeah, we have a large family that has been to some extent dysfunctional. And that is one reason I kind of wince when I hear people talk about nationalism. I am not in favor of some kind of consolidated state of all whites being ruled out of Brussels or from Washington, as Obama and the neocons would want. I like the idea of separate peoples. I like the reference that Dr. Whitman made yesterday about the tiny little 1,000-man group in Africa that is the last representative of one of the branches of humanity, and the need to preserve them as a separate people. I like the idea that the Flemings are preserving their language. But beyond that, we need to return to what existed at the time of, say, before the Reformation, at the time of Erasmus, in which Erasmus could be a Fleming. He could be happy to be a Fleming. He'd be comfortable with that and proud of being a Fleming. But he also understood that he was part of an overarching community of Christendom. And he spoke a language, Latin, which at that time was the lingua franca, and he could travel to England, and he could talk to educated elites in England in Latin. He could do the same in Rome. He could do the same in Salamanca or Burgos in Spain. He could do it in Munich. And nationalism had not become the destructive thing that it became for our people in the 19th and 20th centuries. I think the model for us is that of the Greeks again, sort of a pan-Hellenic model, but one that doesn't break down into any more Peloponnesian wars, like the two Peloponnesian wars we fought in the last century, which very, very well may have erected the gravestone over our race. We have to recognize that everybody, the Irish are part of our family, and so are the English and Scots, and so are the French and the Portuguese and the Spaniards and the Italians and the Germans and the Eastern Slavs, the Russians. We have to recognize that each of these people has a role to play in the defense of our civilization and our race. The Russians have a tremendous role to play as the guardians of the gates against the yellow race, which would very happily swarm into Siberia and fill the spaces of Russia with their own people as a precedent to coming further west to us. Under a foreign policy based upon our narrative of American history, we would regard Putin as our friend and not our enemy. We would regard Russia as our friend and a natural partner, a country with whom we have never fought a war, a country who has no claims against any of our territory, a country that does not invade us with illegal colonizers, a country which, in the case last year, there's one man to thank that we didn't have another war in Syria based upon the lie that was being disseminated that Assad had used chemical weapons, which we suspected at the time was a lie, and we now know was a lie. It was Putin, it was Russia that stopped that war, that prevented us from getting into another catastrophic war. Putin really deserved the Nobel Peace Prize for that. I'm not being cute. Far more than Barack Obama deserved one before he ever even took office. We should be indebted to Putin for heading off war. And I think that's part of the reason he is so hated. All of the vultures of the military-industrial complex were looking forward to the fabulous returns on their money that they were going to get, as they did in the $3 trillion to $6 trillion adventure that they fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. To show you, to depart from where I am in my own narrative, to show you the insanity of a country based upon the idea of a nation explained in terms of the pursuit of a philosophical idea of freedom. I am told, I don't know, because I know very little about railroads. I am told that for the money we have spent in Afghanistan and Iraq, we could have built a nationwide rail system comparable to that the Red Chinese are building all over their nation, where we could dispense with most of our air travel, and we could dispense with much of the paradigm of transportation in which there are 250 million individually owned cars in America. We would have a super speed train system, which I would be able to get into a train in Atlanta and step off in Washington in 3.5 hours at a fraction of the cost. But no, we spent that money freeing the Muslims of the Muslim women of Afghanistan and Iraq. That's what insane people do. That's what people do when they are chained to lies, when they're enslaved by lies. But our narrative is based upon human biology, it's based upon human experience, and our narrative will prevail. This American system and its nonsense and the crazy manics that believe in it, they're on the Titanic, and they're going full speed ahead through the night, and they're on a direct collision course with reality, with truth. People who do not wish to see the truth do not change the truth. They can change their own pattern of irrational and self-destructive behavior. They can change their behavior to be self-destructive. But the iceberg is still there. And the reality of what happens when a ship runs into an iceberg at full speed is still there. And that is one reason why I am confident that they will fail and we will prevail. Small though we are, small that this gathering is, what we are saying will ultimately prevail. Inadequate though we are, we stand in the shoes of Leonidas at Thermopylae, who didn't fight for freedom. You often hear that aspect. Greece is interpreted as a narrative of people fighting for freedom. Leonidas fought for Sparta, and he fought for Greece. He fought for the Spartans at home. He fought for his family, for his children, his cousins, his brothers and sisters, and his parents. That's why the Greeks died at Thermopylae. We stand in the shoes of Miltiades at Salamis, of Charles Martel at Tours, of Drake in the Channel against the Armada. We are here to give life to the dead, to give speech to the dumb, to give sight to the blind. That is our role in this cause that we have embraced. To give life to the dead, not in the sense of a miraculous raising of the dead, but to give life to people who have been stripped of life by being inculcated with a philosophy of materialism and self-indulgence and forfeiting their heritage, their language, everything that should make life meaningful. To give speech to the dumb, to give speech to people who have been unable to speak for themselves, the working people of America, the sexually molested white prisoners in the jail, the elderly white widows trapped in transitional neighborhoods, the people for whom no one has spoken and who are not able to speak for themselves. We're here to give sight to the blind, to take the scales from the eyes of those who have been indoctrinated by the lie and who are chained to the lie. In the Bible, I'm not a big Bible thumper, but I was marinated in the Bible as a Presbyterian child, and so I can't help but refer to it. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but I'll do it anyway. There's a statement in the Bible that he who loses his life shall find it. And that seems contradictory at first, but it isn't contradictory. I remember people like Sam Francis and Glade Whitney and Wilmot Robertson and people like that I have known who are no longer in this room, but who were once in this room. And I feel their spirit among us. When I'm gone, I hope my spirit will live on among you. They lived lives that were often difficult. They lost jobs, they lost money, they were hounded, they were persecuted, but they had happy, meaningful lives. To quote the well oft-quoted lays of Macaulay, how can a man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? We embrace this. We are children of our fathers. Those of you with children are progenitors of your race. We are in the stream. We are in the narrative, the real narrative, not a philosophical narrative, but a real, concrete narrative of a real people. And all of you have honored yourselves and all of us by coming to this meeting today. And I want to close by saying God bless you all today in this room and all others like you in all of our white family all over the world who in the face of this ideology and often in situations requiring much more sacrifice than our own, all who are willing to lift the banner of our cause and our people and take a stand for the unpopular truth, but the truth that will set our people free. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Well, thank you all. This concludes our conference, and may the spirit of our people be with you till we meet next time. Thanks very much.